The Royal Navy sent HMS Manxman into the Mediterranean, knowing that if anything went wrong, she would be on her own. She was an Abdeel-class fast minelayer, built around a simple bargain. Get in before the enemy could react, and get out before they could correct their aim. On July 23, 1941, she was running toward Malta, while ships around her were being knocked out of the fight. She was part of Operation Substance, a convoy mission intended to deliver supplies to the island. The convoy was supported from Gibraltar by Force H, the convening force built around major warships like Ark Royal and Nelson. Despite Manxman's main design role being offensive minelaying, Malta needed urgent personnel and stores, and the Royal Navy was using fast warships to carry what had to get through quickly. She might have had less capacity than a merchant vessel, but much more speed. The operation was already short before the Axis even found it. Leinster, one of the transports meant to carry troops and RAF ground crews to Malta, had grounded at Gibraltar and failed to sail. Roughly 1,000 men were left behind. By the time the convoy had reached the dangerous stretch between Sicily and Tunisia, it was within range of almost everything the Axis could throw at it, including aircraft, submarines, and Italian fast attack boats. By daylight and after dark, each threat found an opening. Inside the Sicilian Narrows, the convoy was stripped down piece by piece. The first attack came low over the water. 9 high-level bombers and at least 6 torpedo aircraft approached from the northeast. Fighters from Ark Royal broke up part of the bombing attack, but 7 bombers still came on from about 10,000 feet. Below them, the torpedo aircraft came in from ahead, out of the sun. HMS Fearless was one of the first ships removed from the fight. 2 torpedo aircraft attacked the destroyer from ahead, dropping from about 70 feet. Fearless avoided the first torpedo, but the second struck after being released at roughly 800 yards. The torpedo left the destroyer burning, disabled, and unable to keep station. The convoy could not gather around her. Malta was still ahead, and the enemy was still attacking. Fearless had been part of the convoy's protection, and now she needed protection herself. When recovery became impossible, HMS Forester later scuttled her. The screen around Manxman was beginning to thin. Then HMS Manchester was hit. The light cruiser had already been maneuvering to avoid earlier attacks when an aerial torpedo came in between 2 merchant ships and caught her as she tried to regain station. She survived, but the hit took her out of the operation. Manchester lost the speed she needed to stay with the convoy and had to turn back toward Gibraltar under escort. She was carrying men and stores meant for Malta. When she turned back, part of the delivery followed her. But the operation had to keep going, and the stores had to be protected. Every hit made that shortfall worse, and Manxman had to evolve to keep things moving. She entered the operation as a transport, and yet, during the convoy battle, Manxman's pom-pom anti-aircraft gun and 1 Ehrlichen cannon helped bring down a bomber, reportedly breaking it apart under fire. In the middle of danger, little by little, she was also becoming a part of the convoy's protection. Her speed made her one of the ships the battered formation could still organize around. Then Force H had to turn back. As the Gibraltar-based covering force, it had helped bring the convoy through the western Mediterranean, but its carrier and heavy ships were not meant to go all the way into Malta's most dangerous approaches. The remaining ships had to tighten up and keep moving toward Malta. Edinburgh was chosen to lead the port column because she was a cruiser, with the guns, bridge height, and command role to control a formation under attack. Meanwhile, Manxman led the starboard column. She was fast, maneuverable, and above all, still in the fight. Now that the convoy was weaker and divided, stopping was not an option. Malta depended on it. Torpedo aircraft forced the columns into hard turns, while bombers drove ships out of line with near misses. The formation bent and opened under every attack, but it had to keep moving east. If a ship lost too much speed, it was simply left behind. After dark, the danger moved directions. Aircraft had attacked from above, but now threats came in low and close. Italian MAS boats, small motor torpedo boats, moved in against the convoy under cover of night. They were hard to pick up, fast enough to strike quickly, and dangerous. One hit could slow a ship, scatter escorts, and force commanders to choose between rescue and momentum. One of their torpedoes hit the merchant ship Sydney Star. She was carrying troops, and the damage turned her into a moving emergency. Just as before, the force could not simply stop around her, so that would simply give the next attacker a better target. And yet, leaving a damaged troop ship to struggle on alone was not an option either. So HMAS Nestor went alongside in the dark. Fearing for her own safety, she began taking soldiers off the damaged ship as swiftly as possible. Nearly 500 men were transferred to reduce the risk of her sinking. After that, Sydney Star was able to continue toward Malta. Nestor also survived the rescue and remained in the operation. By the next morning, the problem had become how to salvage as much of the delivery as possible. Rear Admiral Edward Seifert, the officer commanding the Malta Relief Force, split the formation once again. The 6 remaining transports still needed protection, so the destroyers remained with them, while the faster ships, HMS Edinburgh, HMS Arethusa, and Manxman, were ordered on to Malta with passengers and stores. They had to get in, unload, refuel, and be ready to leave before the danger closed around them again. By noon, Manxman was inside Grand Harbor. The slower convoy would not arrive for several more hours. That gap showed exactly why the Navy had sent a fast minelayer with the convoy, but it did not turn Operation Substance into a clean victory. The operation had already lost time, protection, and cargo capacity. Manxman had done her job, but Malta still had not received everything the operation had been meant to bring. Within 4 days, the Royal Navy sent her back. Operation Style, the new mission, was meant to make up for what the previous run had failed to deliver after Leinster grounded and Manchester was damaged. This time, there would be no slow merchant convoy for the warships to protect. The force itself would carry the cargo. Codenamed Force X, it was built around speed. The light cruisers Hermione and Arethusa, the fast minelayer Manxman, and the destroyers Seek and Lightning. Their job was to move the men and stores themselves, run to Malta quickly, unload, and get out. Together, they carried 92 officers, 1,714 men, and 130 tons of stores. Manxman alone was packed with 648 soldiers and RAF personnel, plus 22 tons of baggage. The intent was to make a fast dash through dangerous water, pass close to the North African coast and through Tunisian territorial waters, land the men and stores, refuel, and get out again. That suited Manxman. Her engines produced 72,000 shaft horsepower, giving her a top speed of roughly 38 to 40 knots in favorable conditions. For a ship carrying mines and stores, that was akin to turning a delivery into a racing car. Such speed did not make her invulnerable, but it made every torpedo attack harder to calculate. The pilot had to fire at where the ship would be, not where it was. Against Manxman's speed, a small mistake was enough. Early on August 2nd, Force X was already making speed for Malta when a submarine appeared in its path. The ships were in line ahead at 28 knots. Hermione first, Manxman behind her, Arethusa astern. Off Tunis, the Italian submarine Tembienne was sighted on the surface. Hermione did not have time to turn the contact into a long submarine hunt. At that speed, with Manxman and Arethusa following her, she used the weapon closest at hand, the ship itself. She rammed Tembienne just behind the conning tower. Tembienne went down, leaving Hermione with a 20-foot gash in her bow. For a moment, the whole fast-run idea was under threat. If Hermione lost speed, Manxman and Arethusa would have to slow with her, and Operation Style would start to resemble the convoy problem it had been designed to avoid. A small force in dangerous water, tied to the pace of its damaged ship. But Hermione did not fall out of line. Whatever the collision had done forward, it had not taken her engines, and it had not stopped her from leading. Force X kept moving, with Manxman and Arethusa still in formation behind her. For roughly the next 4 to 5 hours, Hermione kept leading, with her bow torn open. Despite this wound, Manxman had to keep up at top speed to hold her place in the line. They reached Malta that morning. The troops and stores went ashore, the ships refueled, and by the afternoon of the same day, they were already heading west again. On the way out, Force X proceeded at 26 knots and continued by the same route they'd used on the way in. That night, radar picked up a low-flying aircraft 20 miles to the south. It came in unseen, crossed overhead at about 1,000 feet, opened 8 miles to the north, and turned back for a better attack. 10 minutes later, it came in from Hermione's port side. At roughly 100 yards off Hermione's stern, the aircraft released its torpedo, and Hermione's pom-pom opened fire as it dropped. The torpedo missed the stern. The pilot had been aimed at where the force should have been, not where it actually was. Hermione, Manxman, and Arethusa had already moved beyond the point he had chosen. While Manxman's role in Operation Style didn't boil down to a single dramatic strike, her achievement was that for the second operation in a row, she'd kept pace with the fastest ships, delivered men and stores, and come out undamaged while the enemy tried to break the run around her. For her next mission, the Royal Navy wanted more than speed from Manxman. Now, it wanted the enemy to look straight at her and let her pass. Manxman had to stop being Manxman. She was tasked with crossing watched waters in daylight, under another Navy's colors, and trusting that distance and a little bit of paint could do what speed alone could not. After the Malta runs had shown what Manxman could do, Admiral James Somerville saw a way to use her speed and size for something stranger than transport. She was fast enough to reach the Italian coast and large enough to carry a serious mine load. She only needed to don a new identity. On August 14th, Manxman received an order to alter herself to resemble a French destroyer. This was part of Operation Mincemeat, not the famous later deception with the body and the fake papers, but an earlier Royal Navy operation with the same basic idea. Around 120 extra hands were brought in to transform the ship into a false French destroyer. The model they chose to follow was Leopard, a large French destroyer close enough in size for the trick to work. Manxman was about 418 feet long, while Leopard was roughly 420 feet. At sea, recognition often came down to shape: bow, stern, forecastle break, funnels, and masts. If those details looked wrong, the alarm could come before she was anywhere near the target. Overall, the ships were not identical, but they were close enough that paint, canvas, wood, and altered fittings could push Manxman into the right category before anyone looked too hard, but not close enough for it to be easy. For instance, funnels were unevenly spaced, capped dark, and broke the ship's profile differently from Manxman's cleaner Abdiel lines. Her masts had a sharper rake. Forward, Leopard's forecastle stepped down in a way Manxman's did not. Aft, her stern did not finish with Manxman's same clean minelayer shape. So the workers fitted a false bow and a false stern to break up her real profile. Paint changed the apparent lines of the hull. Canvas and wooden spars added shapes that were never part of the original ship. The result was not perfect, but it didn't have to fool someone standing on the pier. It only had to fool an observer who saw her for a few seconds at a distance and had to make a quick report. When the Admiral later inspected her, the signal reporting the job complete ended with, quote, "Vive la France." On August 15th, Manxman left the Kyle of Loch Hulsh from Milford Haven, where she loaded 156 mines. From there, she sailed to Gibraltar, refueled from Brown Ranger in the dark, picked up her orders, and cast off on August 22nd. The real Leopard was not expected to cross her path. She was a free French ship in British hands, undergoing conversion in Britain. The risk was not meeting the original. It was being recognized as a copy. And so, Force H helped cover the move. Nelson, Ark Royal, Hermione, and their destroyers left Gibraltar as the visible threat, the kind of force Italian observers had to take seriously. If enemy attention moved toward them, Manxman had a better chance of slipping through separately under her false identity. At sunrise on August 23rd, Manxman hoisted the French ensign. She was about 40 nautical miles north of Majorca, flying French colors and steering as though bound for Toulon. Visibility was exceptional, which made the disguise more important and more dangerous. Then, a Dornier flying boat passed about 8 miles off her port beam. This was the test the disguise had been built for. From that distance, the aircraft crew would not see every false fitting, but they would see the shape, the funnels, the masts, the bow, the colors. If Manxman read wrong, the mission could be finished before the mines ever reached the water. For the longest minute, everyone aboard Manxman had reason to believe the mission might be exposed before it began. But the Dornier did nothing. It saw the ship and let her continue. Manxman then turned east, and 3 hours later, altered course toward Ajaccio to make the French identity look even more convincing. She kept the disguise until daylight was gone. Only after dark could Manxman stop pretending. The French colors came down, and the white ensign went up as the crew stripped away the disguise that had carried her through daylight. The false bow came off. Her paravanes streamed out to guard against mines, and the ship increased speed, heading north of Corsica toward the Italian coast. As soon as the first mine slid off Manxman's stern, the water behind her became dangerous. This was the part of Operation Mincemeat that only she could do. The disguise had carried her through daylight, but now her real design took over. For this, she was not inside a lit harbor or close under Italian guns. She was working after midnight on the coastal routes around Genoa and Livorno, far enough offshore for darkness and distance to hide what she was doing. Between 2:08 a.m. and 3:38 a.m., Manxman laid 140 mines and 16 obstructors in 4 parallel lines, almost her full offensive mine load. Instead of carpeting the seabed, the mines formed a hidden fence across the route, with a new charge going over the stern roughly every 35 seconds. In little more than 90 minutes, the ship had turned a stretch of Italian coastal water into a trap roughly 30 square miles in size, more than 20 times the area of Central Park. A slower mine layer, making 15 knots, would need almost 2.5 hours to cover the same distance as Manxman. That meant Manxman could cut roughly 90 minutes from the escape alone, before counting the approach. With the lay complete, Manxman withdrew westward, 6 nautical miles south of Gorgona Island, slowing to 10 knots. Hydrophones might be listening, and the crew still had to bring on the paravanes and put the false bow back in place. When Captain Robert Dixon felt they were far enough to be safe, he ordered full speed, and Manxman turned west at 37 knots, racing to clear the Gulf of Genoa before sunrise. At that speed, every hour put another 37 nautical miles between Manxman and the minefield, roughly the distance from New York to Long Island Sound. After the sprint, she resumed the disguise and reduced to 33 knots to avoid making smoke. Soon after, a warship appeared hull down to the southeast, low on the horizon, with only her upper part visible. She was probably a Vichy French ship. If the other ship looked too closely, signaled, or came near enough to compare details, the false bow and French colors might no longer be enough, so Manxman kept her distance. The warship stayed hull down to the southeast and did not interfere. Whether it failed to identify Manxman, had no reason to challenge her, or simply remained too far away to notice anything, the result was the same. Manxman was allowed to keep moving. The Italians found the field 2 days later, after 22 mines surfaced. They could tell they were dealing with British mines, but knowing what the weapon was did not make the water safe. On September 21st, the auxiliary minesweeper Carmelo Noli struck a magnetic mine while working the area and went down. As far as the Italians knew, the identity of the minelayer remained a mystery, as did the method that had put the field there. Manxman's reward for getting away was more work. The Royal Navy had found a ship for jobs that did not fit clean categories. Manxman could mine, transport, deceive, bombard, and run alone when the margin was thin. That made her valuable and increasingly easy to spend. Manxman was refining a method. The ship would separate from heavier company, use her speed to reach the laying position first, empty the mine deck, and get out before the enemy could turn the area into a fight. Off Norway, she did exactly that by racing ahead of HMS Kenya and HMS Lightning at 35 knots, while they followed at 28, laying 155 mines off Stadlandet, then withdrawing through water dangerous enough that her paravanes cut loose an enemy mine on the way out. After that, the same method moved south and became almost routine along the coast of occupied Europe. Off France, from the Channel to the Bay of Biscay, Manxman kept repeating the formula near routes serving Le Havre, Dieppe, Lorient, and Brest. Before long, commanders were using Manxman for more than minefields. For instance, in the Indian Ocean, she joined Operation Stab, a deception effort centered on a fake landing force near the Andaman Islands. Its purpose was to pull Japanese attention away while U.S. forces were fighting through the Solomons. It might have been a different theater, but it kept asking the same from Manxman, to use speed and presence to make the enemy look the wrong way. By late 1942, that confidence sent her back to the Mediterranean. Malta was still under pressure, and ordinary supply runs had already cost the Royal Navy too much in ships, men, and time. On November 11th, Manxman left Alexandria with 350 tons of foodstuffs and 200 military personnel aboard. The cargo included powdered milk, dried cereals, and preserved meat. The mission nearly failed before she was even clear. Manxman grounded while leaving the harbor boom, the defensive barrier guarding the entrance. On another operation, that could have been enough to stop the run, inspect the hull, and wait for a safer moment. Not here. Manxman was pulled clear and sent on. By then, unless the ship was damaged badly enough to make the passage impossible, she was expected to keep going. Once darkness fell, the escort destroyers turned back, and Manxman continued alone at high speed. Roughly 36 hours after leaving Alexandria, she reached Malta on November 12th and was escorted through the swept channel by HMS Hythe. She had delivered once again, but each return made the next order easier to give. Manxman was no longer being saved for special cases. She was the ship the commanders reached for when the job was unusual, urgent, and dangerous. Next time, that reputation would carry her straight into a trap. The Sicilian Channel was one of those passages the Axis could not afford to lose. Ships moving between Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy had to use it. In late November 1942, Manxman left Algiers to lay mines off Khani Rocks, a small group of rocks off the Tunisian coast, close to the routes Axis shipping still needed. By the time Manxman was off Bona, now Annaba, on Algeria's northeast coast, she had already come roughly 250 nautical miles east from Algiers and was closing in on the waters leading toward her target. Just then, her paravanes went out, and her speed came up to 28 knots. Then a shape appeared off the starboard bow, only about 300 yards away. In the dark, at that speed, there was no time to hold a debate on the bridge. It might have been a motor torpedo boat. It might already have fired. If a torpedo was in the water, Manxman's best chance was to turn toward it and narrow the target. She swung hard to comb the possible torpedo track, then passed close under the craft's stern. The turn may have saved her from a torpedo, but it also brought her close enough that a collision became a danger in its own right. Only afterward did the crew realize the contact might not have been an enemy boat. The first lieutenant reported seeing depth charges, but no torpedoes. To him, the craft looked more like a British motor launch than an enemy boat. The bridge had only one safe assumption. treat the contact as hostile. Between 10:34 p.m. and 10:51, she had laid 156 mines in 3 groups. That was her full load, dropped in 17 minutes. A mine went into the water roughly every 6 or 7 seconds. The last mines went overboard as the moon began to lift. Until then, darkness had worked in Manxman's favor. Now the light was coming up behind her. The trap was finished. The escape was not. Manxman turned away at 32 knots, putting distance between herself and the field before moonlight could turn the empty sea into a searchlight. By the next day, she was back at Algiers. On December 3rd, the German transport Menace hit the field and sank. On December 5th, the hospital ship Graz also struck one of the mines and went down, a consequence that made the field's effects more complicated than a simple military success. However, by then, Manxman herself had already been torpedoed on her way to Gibraltar. The first torpedo missed so closely that it should have been a warning that she was now crossing a sea where another hunter was waiting. That hunter was submarine U-375, commanded by Jürgen Könenkamp. From the submarine side, Manxman was not identified as a fast minelayer. She was mistaken for a London-class cruiser. She was smaller than that, but through a periscope, with only a narrow view of a moving target, a long, fast warship could be read as something larger than it really was. Manxman was already taking anti-submarine precautions, knowing she was in submarine waters and a steady course would make the attacker's calculation easier. She was zigzagging at 21 knots, with her Aztec sonar crew listening for submarines. Every turn was meant to spoil a firing solution before it existed. And yet, these precautions gave her less protection than any 37-knot sprint she'd ever make. A lookout saw the first torpedo coming in from port. It passed close astern, running shallow, and crossed behind her from port to starboard. For a few seconds, it looked as if Manxman had escaped. Then the second torpedo hit. It slammed into Manxman's port side, level with the engine room, only about 3 seconds after the first torpedo had missed the stern. Both engine rooms flooded. So did the gearing room. Manxman lost power, stopped, and began to list heavily. Inside U-375, the crew heard the explosions, 51 seconds after firing. The German commander believed he had scored 2 hits, so he tried to finish the job by firing another torpedo. It missed, and a second follow-up torpedo missed as well. Even without power and listing, Manxman was not a clean target. From a submerged submarine, Könenkamp had to work out the range, bearing, and angle before firing at a hull that was no longer behaving predictably. By this point, nearby ships had already been directed to her position, but they were still hours away. Manxman had to survive on her own for the time being. Since Manxman could no longer run, her crew tried to buy time. When Aztec picked up a possible contact, Manxman's guns fired into the water, trying to create enough noise and disturbance to confuse the submarine's approach. At dusk, the crew lowered the fast motorboat and used it to drop depth charges around Manxman. The idea was to make it sound as if escorts had arrived and were beginning a proper anti-submarine attack. If U-375 believed destroyers were close, or even hesitated long enough to check, Manxman gained time. HMS Pathfinder reached her at night and took her in tow. Other escort ships, including Eskimo, Restiv, and Puckeridge, gathered around the crippled mine layer and formed a screen around her. With the screen up, Manxman reached Oran, the Allied port in Algeria, where she could be kept afloat and patched. It took the better part of 2 years to put her right. Manxman returned to service in April 1945, 28 months after U-375 had caught her off the coast of North Africa. By then, she had missed most of the decisive years that followed her torpedoing. The war that had once needed her speed had also learned how to work without her. Aircraft offered a way to mine enemy waters without risking a thin-skinned surface ship in narrow seas, full of submarines and air threats. But aerial mining was not safe work. Crews still faced flak, fighters, bad weather, and difficult navigation over hostile water. That changed the scale of the risk. The Navy no longer had to gamble a whole fast mine layer and hundreds of men every time it wanted mines dropped in enemy waters. Instead of returning to the same cycle of fast mine-laying raids, Manxman's later wartime service moved away from the role that had made her name. She was recommissioned in April 1945 and prepared for the British Pacific Fleet, but she did not lay any more mines before the war ended. Across the war, she laid 3,112 mines. Of those, 2,481 were in offensive minefields, laid near enemy routes rather than behind friendly lines. While Manxman survived, several of her Abdiel-class sisters did not. Latona was lost after an air attack. Welshman went down after being torpedoed. Abdiel was destroyed by mines at Taranto. They were also sent into places where speed and surprise mattered more than armor. By 1945, half of the Abdiel-class mine layers were gone. Manxman had proved that the fast mine layer was not a failed idea, but the same war that rewarded her speed also punished her lack of protection. Her survival showed what the gamble could achieve. Her sisters showed what it could cost.